Speculation has caused an incredible amount of harm to neighborhoods. It's contributed tremendously to blight. It's forced the city to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in demolition. It's cost, an uncountable amount in tax revenue over the years. It's been one of the most harmful forces on Detroit's built environment over the last decade.
That's the voice of Aaron Mondry from Outlier Media. If you've wondered why some buildings seem to stay vacant and decaying while others nearby find life, or how thousands of homes can deteriorate with no improvements while people live there, or that empty lot that's just been sitting, well, it might be speculators. Speculation is a huge issue in the city of Detroit, where for a long time land values were very low and enforcement very lax. Now, things are starting to change. I'm Jer Stays, and this is your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. And today we get into the scale of this problem, how we got here, and what's ahead with Aaron Mondry as he heads up the Outlier Media series, The Speculators of Detroit. Thanks to our members on Patreon who keep the lights on, patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Local media needs local support. And don't forget to check out the folks over at Outlier too. They do great work. All right, let's jump into that conversation. Joining me at the studio at Techtown is none other than the excellent Aaron Mondry. He's a reporter for Outlier Media and previous guest of the show, and he's up to something brand new. But Aaron, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing very well, Jer. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely, because I have had literally 15 people send me links to this Speculators of Detroit series. This is a question that I think has vexed a lot of people who are interested in Detroit for a long time. You see all of these buildings. You see some places where stuff is really going well. And then in the middle of it or right next to it or whatever, you'll see a building that's just sitting, rotting, empty, boarded up, sometimes not even boarded up, sometimes pieces falling off of it. And people go, why? What is going on? So I'm really glad that you did a dive into this. What got you personally into wanting to look into the Speculators of Detroit?
Well, I think a lot of similar feelings as your listeners. We've reached a stage in development and real estate valuation here in the city where a lot of these older historic buildings can be successfully rehabbed. Like you said, we're seeing that happen. But then we also see a lot of absent property owners who aren't willing to take the time and money to invest in them, even when it's proven that it can be profitable in a lot of cases. And then there's also just the neighborhood level, resident level impact that's been so enormously widespread here. Speculation has caused an incredible amount of harm to neighborhoods. It's contributed tremendously to blight. It's forced the city to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in demolition. It's cost, an uncountable amount in tax revenue over the years. It's been one of the most harmful forces on Detroit's built environment over the last decade.
In a couple of these pieces, because you have two pieces out as we're recording this, one of the speculators talks about how it hasn't cost the city any money, of course, trying to refer to incentives. But in fact, when the city has to take something down, when the city has to write blight tickets, when the city has to do enforcement, that actually costs money.
Yeah. When a speculator buys a ton of cheap, low-value property, often at the tax auction, and we can get into the tax auction at some point if you like, there's almost always a large percentage of that property ends up back in the auction because that speculator doesn't pay taxes. So these properties just keep churning, not producing tax revenue, steadily deteriorating over time because these people aren't investing in them. It is extremely costly for the city in a bunch of different ways.
It seems to be like some sort of real estate lottery ticket.
Yeah, I mean, these people view property as an asset, like soybean futures or something. It's just an address, a number on a spreadsheet. They don't...
I've seen the videos on YouTube.
Right. I mean, I think, they don't appreciate or they don't care about the impacts that deteriorating property has on the people who live in them or live near them. These effects are very real, very harmful. And I just think that's why it's extremely important that we highlight this issue.
Do we have an estimate or a guesstimate about how much property is in the city that's held by speculators?
We have an estimate. It's a pre-2020 estimate, about 20% of the city's real estate.
I feel like some work needs to be done to update that number.
Yes, and it is being done.
Great.
I'm glad you brought that up. So there is a project called Property Praxis, which is working to catalog speculation in the city. It was doing some good work pre-2020. U of M researcher Joshua Akers and the founder of Detroitography, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, Alex Hill. They were doing this work, but it went on hiatus during the pandemic, as a lot of things did. And now Alex Hill has restarted it and is recoding all of the new data. And this is very, very involved, painstaking work. It's taking a long time. We can talk more about how it's actually done, but we're going to learn a lot more very soon. He's hoping to publish the data and a new interactive map, I think, by the end of the year. And that will really give enormous insights into speculation today.
Now, I've traveled and done business in other cities a lot, and I can't help but think, my gut feeling, it is a bigger issue here than other places. Am I right?
So one expert I talked to said it's at the tail end of the distribution curve. You know, speculation is something that happens a lot across the entire country. You know, people are going to try and predict development hotspots, places where real estate is going to improve in value. It's sort of it's just a fact of life in real estate and anything that is an asset. People are going to try to speculate on it. I think Detroit has some extremely unique features, had some in its, recent economic past that made it particularly easy to speculate here. Extremely low bar of entry. You could buy just unbelievable amounts of real estate for extremely cheap. And the holding costs were low. You didn't have to pay taxes. There were no consequences for not paying taxes. You could continue to buy real estate. There were very few costs for not investing in your property. You would get blight tickets, but we know that property owners tend to not pay those. I think something like 15% of blight tickets are paid on average. So, those things enabled property speculation to really be rampant here.
So how does most of this speculation get started? What is the chain here, the life cycle chain of this?
I think that's really important to understand. So a lot of this started during the housing bubble, and real estate values here depreciated a tremendous amount. And you did not see the tax assessor's office properly change assessments here. So people were paying way more in taxes than we should have. The economy was terrible, which means people couldn't pay their taxes. And the city made it really hard to get the poverty tax exemption that people below a certain income level are entitled to. And that produced a wave of tax foreclosures.
So this is what, 2008, 2010? When was this?
Between 2008 and 2015, about was when you saw the largest numbers of tax foreclosures in the city. Thousands, tens of thousands every year. And because, again, real estate values were so low, you had Wayne County auctioning off these properties for nothing, $500, $1,000. And there were no limits on what you could buy and on who could participate in the auction. So you had people like Michael Kelly, the Hagermans, Dennis Kefilanos. I don't know if listeners are familiar with all these names.
And the first part of your series is about Dennis.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Just buying, Michael Kelly at one point owned over 1,000 homes, properties in the city. And as anyone who has ever been a landlord or owned more than a single property, you know how hard it is to take care of that place and how much attention it requires. No human being can properly care for 1,000 properties. And we're going to do a piece on Michael Kelly as well in the future. We're going to profile a number of these people. These properties would rack up blight tickets. They would, evict their tenants in enormous numbers. They would let them fall into foreclosure again. And Wayne County, the treasurer's office, just was not paying attention and would let these same people bid over and over and over again.
I feel weird that it's like they're not paying attention or that they didn't pay attention. That seems very off to me because this feels like big red flags that many of us in the community were like, hey, this is happening. And it was like talking to a brick wall.
Yeah, I know. And there's two things. One is it's incredibly easy to hide who you are. So bidding at the auction, there's a two-step process. Someone bids on a property, and then whoever the winner of that property is deeds that property to someone else. So there's two layers of shielding there, if you will. You could have an attorney or just anybody bid on your behalf, and then they can deed that to an LLC, a limited liability company. And you can create as many LLCs as you want. So you pay $50 and you're essentially a new person under the law. Now, there are ways of finding out who the owners of that LLC are. They're not particular. They can be difficult. You know, property owners can do quite a bit to hide who they are. And in fact, completely hide who they are if they really want to. But we also know that the Treasurer's Office was not doing any of this due diligence because in 2022, in another article we wrote, we found that Dennis Kefalanos was using his own name to bid on properties and deed them to himself, despite owing maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and blight tickets against the county's own rules. The county explicitly says if you are delinquent in taxes or you owe blight tickets, you are not allowed to bid on properties.
Why did the county drop the ball? Or how did they drop the ball? Are they understaffed? Did they not pay attention?
We never got a good answer about this. They basically said, they make people sign an affidavit, and then they said, well, we don't actually have to enforce this if we don't want to. I guess there's nothing in state law that requires them to bar people from doing it. It's just sort of the honor system. I don't know. It's strange.
So what's next in the life cycle? You've bought all these properties for really cheap. What happens next?
So I think a lot of speculators will group their properties into tiers. They'll say, these properties are my highest value properties. These are my income earners. I can fill them with tenants, get some, regular revenue from them, still don't have to keep them up. And there are ways that a lot of these people, like Michael Kelly, like the Hagermans, have been especially predatory in their landlord practices.
And I've seen stories and know stories of roofs that have holes and walls falling down. I have a friend who was living in a place and literally their wall fell off.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've personally seen a lot of these places too. Something even more egregious is they will enter into land contracts with these tenants. And the tenants will think, oh, this is great. I can pay what they feel like is a rent over however many years, 2-5 years. And then at the end of that term, I will be the owner of this property. Except under the terms of these land contracts, they are also responsible for paying the taxes. They are also responsible for fixing up the house. And this allows the speculators to sort of wipe their hands of any further investment again. And then if they are late at all on a rental payment, immediate eviction. So they get to treat them like owners and renters at the same time when it's convenient for them. And they also don't have to invest in the property. From the perspective of a speculator, it's a perfect arrangement. Then the second grouping, I would say, are maybe less valuable. However, they can try to offload them to other speculators. So you see like this secondary market of sales between speculators, again, trying to, work the system to make those tiny margins more profitable. And then at the very tail end, you have the properties that are not they're in such bad shape that there's no way they can make any money off them without investing in them. And those they just let go back into the foreclosure. And what's also egregious about this is you don't have to pay taxes. You don't pay taxes on them. When they go into foreclosure, the tax debt essentially gets wiped clean. They can buy it back again. It's called tax washing. And so the tax debt that you previously owed no longer is there.
I mean, it may be legally correct, but it sounds morally bankrupt to me.
Yes, it sure does.
And that is an opinion, of course, but it sounds that way. But the small ball of these individual properties and some rent here and there doesn't seem like it would be worth the effort. And it seems like this is more about if you can get a bigger payout. So let's talk about the bigger payout situation.
Some of these speculators are probably hoping that a big, national real estate firm or hedge fund will purchase their entire portfolio, and then they can make a big windfall profit at that point. I don't know for sure. I think also the equation for a lot of these speculators has changed recently. And again, this is information we're hopefully going to be able to confirm rather soon once Property Praxis releases their data. But because property values have gone up so much in the last decade, now it might be a more profitable time for people to sell. And also, there's been an uptick in enforcement from the city. You're seeing more lawsuits. You're seeing more blight tickets, more attempts to collect on those blight tickets from the city. And, they're also proposing the land value tax, which, if that goes into effect, is going to increase the tax amount that vacant home, on property owners of vacant homes. So, I think we'll see, but I think speculators might be reevaluating their portfolio at the moment.
There have been a number of multi-million-dollar windfalls in the past, though, that you reported about.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's true. I mean, so Dennis Kefalonos, who, like you said, our first article was about, he's been investing in real estate since the 80s. And he bought some extremely valuable property in like the early 2000s and later. I mean, he's been continually transacting since the 80s. But, he bought like a couple of downtown buildings, like the Kresge building, back when maybe Detroit hadn't hit complete rock bottom. But, before property values really were in, where they are now. And he was able to sell, he bought for like a couple $100,000 and then sold to Dan Gilbert for, $6 million more, depending on the property. He bought Shapiro Hall from Wayne State for $2 million, sold it for $16 million, bought the Hotel Fort Wayne for $60,000, sold it for $2 million to the Illiches. So he's made out handsomely in a number of these deals. And he never really had to put any money into them. He would, his playbook was often buy these properties cheaply, propose some developments, say, I want to do this. I want to, turn this into apartments. I want to make this into a mall or mixed use building. But then nothing would ever come of these developments. And then when it made sense to sell, he would sell.
Whether it was him or other speculators, I feel like this has fueled some of the skepticism about Detroit's comeback, because many people who have been here a while, including myself, are used to the idea of like the vapor press release, where it's like the rule, like, well, is there a shovel in the ground? If there's a shovel in the ground, I'll believe this thing is happening. There's no reason to get excited about something until a developer has a track record that they're actually going to make it happen. Do you think for longtime residents or people who've been around a minute, this might fuel into some of the skepticism that, okay, it's great, these people are coming in town, but what are they going to do? Are they going to leave it? Are they going to build something that's not, or are they just not going to do something with it? I know that, at least for me, with some people I've talked to, that's been a frustration.
Yeah, I mean, the person I spoke to on Dennis Kefalonos' behalf, Nico Matsumakis, who's the general manager of Boydell Development, Kefalonos' development firm, he cited all of these efforts that they're making in various buildings. Like there's one in Eastern Market, a bar is going to open. There's a cold storage building in Corktown that they're turning into artists' business studios. But we haven't, like you said, seen any kind of announcement about them. We don't, the general public doesn't know what's going in them. We don't know how much they're going to cost to build. We know very, very few details, just what he told me in that interview, essentially. And I think given Dennis's track record, it's hard to have much faith that they're going to come about. And it's going to take a very long, Nico was saying that Just pay attention in the coming years. You're going to see things happen. We're doing good stuff all the time, but it's going to take a long time to change people's perception about Dennis Kefilanos because he has he's demonstrated over decades that he isn't willing to, develop his properties.
What has changed, do you think, with the city to step up that enforcement? Because there's even been an increase of enforcement during the Duggan administration, right? At the beginning of the administration, there was not as much enforcement. Now it seems like there's a lot more. One listener lives near the Michigan building in downtown Detroit and says, hey, I'm so glad that the city is doing something because in their view, they saw a lot of things that were happening with that structure that didn't seem safe, in their opinion. And now in your reporting talks about how the city is actively pursuing issues with that. What do you think changed with the city in the last 10 years?
There may have been a philosophical change. Sort of, we've addressed these more fundamental issues, and now it's time to go after the bad actors. But they also got some ARPA money to directly address this problem. The city's top lawyer, Conrad Mallett, told me that they have an additional something like 6 to 8 attorneys on staff working specifically on nuisance abatement lawsuits through ARPA funding. And they're going to be able to fund those attorneys through the end of 2025.
Oh, wow.
I think now they are taking an especially aggressive approach because they sort of have a limited time frame to get this, potentially limited time frame to get this stuff done. Now, we can also talk about how much it's actually making a difference because you look at some of the lawsuits that the city has filed against Dennis Kefilanos. There was the cold storage building in Corktown that I mentioned. That's now being worked on. You have the Civic Theater, which Dennis then let go into foreclosure. What else was there? There's a church on Grand Avenue, Grand River. I don't know what's become of that. There's the Michigan Theater and Building. We'll see about that. And then there was the Southwest Detroit Hospital, which Dennis subsequently sold to DCFC. So I think in those cases, you have a demonstrated positive outcome in most cases. Now, that's 5 buildings. They have 14. They're targeting 14 buildings against Dennis. I don't know exactly how many they're targeting across the city. I think in those instances, you are seeing some movement. There was the Mammoth building on Grand River that's now being worked on. There may be another high profile case to demonstrate that these lawsuits are making an impact. But, we're talking about a handful of buildings when across the entire city, we're talking about thousands.
One of the things I'll sometimes say is that the city has a huge budget, but it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And it very much seems like that's the case with this, because if the city had the budget and resources to have these attorneys all along, we might have had a whole different situation.
It's true. You read the lawsuits and there was like a demolition order for one of these buildings back in 2010 or something, or 2015, and it just was never carried out. And, attorneys for these property owners can extend these lawsuits. They can drag it out for a really long time. They can fix one thing, and so the city drops it, and then they check back in a few months or a year, and it's, there's a new problem or the old one's back, and so you've got to refile the lawsuit. And hearings, there's months between hearings, so this all takes a lot of time. And if the city only has until the end of 2025 to pursue these in a systematic way, that could present a problem for this strategy.
Right, because a property owner could say, well, I'm just going to try to wait this out till 2025. I feel like it's important that there is some sort of focus on either raising the money or targeting the money through council or whatever to continue this process, because it's not just downtown, it's all these neighborhoods that are impacted by these issues. I mean, the big buildings get a lot of traction online, right? But so much of this, as you mentioned with Mr. Kelly, and there's going to be others, are throughout the city neighborhoods, right?
Yeah, you're right. And actually, the city did file lawsuits pre-2020 against Kelly and the Hagermans. I have not looked back into those lawsuits. That's something I will be doing in the next weeks and months. We need to gauge the impact of those, because those are just as important, like you said. In fact, maybe more so, because those people own hundreds of properties where people live in the neighborhoods where the impact is not as obvious.
So, Aaron, what's next?
So we've got an article coming out on on the 29th that's going to be looking at the ways speculators hide their identities and how difficult it is to uncover who really owns real estate in Detroit. We're going to be looking at the property praxis data, doing a deep analysis on that, looking at how portfolios have changed over time, who are some of the big investors today. We're going to be taking a neighborhood level view of this issue, looking at Morningside and maybe another one, seeing how it's had an impact on residents' day-to-day lives. We're going to be looking at efforts from the city to combat this, whether it's working, looking at the potential of things like the land value tax. And then we're also going to continue to profile some of these people. So we're planning profiles of Michael Kelly and the Hagermans and probably a couple more.
Well, as they say, watch this space. Aaron Mondry over at Outlier Media. I really appreciate this in-depth reporting work. Thank you so much for your time at the studio today.
Thank you so much, Cher.
Tomorrow, Norris Howard and Devin O'Reilly will be this Friday sharing what's new, what's next, and what matters in Metro Detroit. Do not forget to leave 5 stars on your favorite podcast app for your daily Detroit. We love to have you here. I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.